There we go. It is time, ladies and gentlemen, it is time for day 66 of Handmade Hero. Welcome and thank you for joining me this morning. It is a beautiful morning here in sunny Seattle, Washington. I don't know why it's sunny. We have a reputation for rain, but it's been very sunny this summer. I don't know. Global warming, who knows? I don't really know. Not a climatologist, but what I will say is it is sunny here and I've had to block out the light. There's still some leaking in the back here. You would just see me in a giant halo of light today. Anyway, thank you for joining me for Handmade Hero. This, of course, is the show where we code a complete game live on Twitch, from scratch, no engine, no libraries. And again, it's really been a pleasure doing it. It's something I like to do. It's the way I like to code things because I don't know. Maybe I'm a control freak is partially the reason I like to have sort of that entire thing, no engine and no library. I like to kind of go in there and know how every little part works. But I think it's also it's a great knowledge base, really, to go through and do all this sorts of thing. I think every programmer should do it once, get that sort of understanding of the complete pipeline, and really just be able to sort of know how everything works, even if you do end up deciding to use engines, use libraries, because there are good stuff out there for that. It just kind of makes you so much more well-rounded and so much more able to deal with stuff. And I don't know. It's a great feeling knowing you know how to do everything, even if you then choose not to. You can make better decisions, and you can also be more powerful in terms of dealing with problems in the stuff that you do use. And heaven knows there's problems in most of the stuff we use these days. It's true. Software is complicated. So let's get started. We're on day 66 today, so if you have pre-ordered the game on handmadehero.org, you will want to unzip day 65 source code. That's something you can download, obviously. Unzip day 65 source code, and you'll be exactly where I am today. So if you'd like to follow along at home with the code, that is how you would do it. Let's go ahead and open up the aforementioned Handmade Hero. I believe that we had just finished up updating our code to use simulation regions, which was kind of a cool thing. I think I liked, whoa, oops, don't accidentally hit that button. I think I told Windows I wanted help. Don't want to see what that's going to do. So what we had done is we'd finished updating our code to use simulation regions, but we hadn't actually gotten a chance to go through and actually debug it all, and there's a couple features we needed to add to it still in order to make it be complete and do all the things that we needed. And so today we just kind of need to go through, make sure that everything's cleaned out and working properly with our new code, and we need to add one or two small things to it to make sure that it does everything that we need. So what we have here, if I remember correctly, is we have a simulation region which does not currently have the option of allowing entities to not essentially exist at a location. In other words, there was already a concept sort of in our game. We had only just started toying around with it, but there was already a concept that you could have something like a sword that the hero was carrying or could use, and that sword wasn't anywhere in the world in particular until they chose to use it or swing it, right? And again, this is not a fully fleshed out concept yet. It was just something we were playing around with, but it seemed very potentially useful to be able to have entities that don't have a specific position in the world so that they can come into being and out of being as far as rendering and stuff is concerned. That seems very useful, and we could do a lot with that. So in our simulation region, what we would like to do is support that operation. And so what we kind of want to do is have some sort of a flag or some kind of something where when we load something into the simulation region to update it, we can smoothly handle the fact that it doesn't actually exist spatially. It only exists logically. And then when we restream it out, we will keep that information. So basically on the in and out, keep track of it, and then on any of the updates that we do in the sim region, understand that it's not actually participating spatially in our simulation. So how do we do that, right? And that's a good question. Since it's a concept we haven't really done much with, it's kind of, we don't really know much about the requirements of it. But what I would say is we do already have this collides concept here. And so what I think is I do wonder if maybe now's a good time to just kind of introduce the concept of having flags on our entity. Now we've seen flags before already. They're kind of a good catch-all for just a simple, small piece of storage that allow us to tag our entities with special conditions that we want them to have. And so, excuse me. And so it seems to me that since this is kind of a special concept that we want to make sure we can always check about or check for, it seems like it would be a nice thing to put in those flags, right? It seems like it'd be a nice thing to be able to mark entities specifically as being spatially non-existent so that we can specially check for that in code and not have to do something where like the position is set to a large value and that's the only clue, right? So I think what I might do is go ahead and just do that. I'm going to just make a little enum here to kind of hold our flags. And again, there's no particular reason to make an enum. It's kind of just a habitual thing that I do just to group things together, where I'll put them in an enum. We could alternatively just make a series of pound defines, or if you're a person who likes const values, you could do them that way. Basically, all we need to do is define a bunch of flags that basically say what the properties of entities are that we want to store in these flags, right? So I'll go ahead and say underneath the entity type, we're just going to have a flags field, right? And then we're going to get rid of this collides, and I'm going to say entity flag underscore collides, right? So I'll do it this way. So there's different ways you can write these flag fields, and I usually write them a different way. I usually write flag fields like this, where I do like, that, and then as I go down, I do 2, 4, 8, right? Because what we want to do for flags is we want to have a bit field, right, where each bit of a value represents a different Boolean condition. But lately, I've been wondering why I do that. I've been wondering why I don't just do it this way, because this seems like a lot easier to read, where you just kind of do like that, right? Where you just shift 1 up by an increasing decimal value, because that's just a lot easier to read than this. So I'm going to try doing it this way because I feel like I've just been doing it wrong. I mean, not wrong. There's no wrong way to do it as long as I come out to the right values, but I feel like this is maybe just easier. So lately in my own code as well, I've been thinking I should probably just write it like this. Now, ideally what we have is a thing that makes it so that this just happened for you automatically. And I believe that John Blow's language already has this feature. But unfortunately, we don't have John Blow's language yet. Someday. All right. So we have collides, and then maybe we have a thing that's like non-spatial or something like that, where an entity can sort of just be tagged as non-spatial, and then at that point, we know that that entity is not going to participate in any spatial operations, and the p-value for it is essentially meaningless, right? I might want to arrange some of these things a little bit differently here as well, like so. We have some cleanup to do here in here as well. Look, we haven't really dealt with z's yet, so that might be something to do in the relatively near future as well, because we haven't really thought about that much, and it would be nice to get that under control as well as one thing we do before we go much further with our entity stuff. Maybe put in some stairs where you go up and down, and just think about how we want to handle that and get that going. So anyway, if I have these here, what I can do now to kick off this change is to just compile the program and see where collides was happening, and then decide how I want to handle like these positions, right? And so there's a bunch of different ways I could do this. One way I could do this is having calls to check each individual flag. What I think I might want to do is basically say, just have something that's like flag is set or something, where I do the entity and I pass which flag it is that I'm looking for, like this. I think that might just be an easier way to do it. So I can just say, is, or maybe just even is set entity, and then I pass that flag value that I want, right? That seems relatively straightforward to me, so I think that's what I'm going to start with. And that's just an easy way of making it so that it's clear what's going on, and it's just it's a really simple function. The function is just taking one of these sim entities, like so, and then a flag value, like that. I can make it so that this is kind of an annoying part, right? In C, one of the things that's kind of annoying is what I'd like to be able to do is say, I want to take flag value here, but it has to be one of it has to be some combination of SymEntity flags. That would give me a little extra type checking or something like that. Unfortunately, you can't really do stuff like that in C. I can understand why. It's a little bit of a hard problem. But so as a result, I'm just going to take a uint32 there. The reason I don't take a SymEntity flags value there is because you wouldn't be able to OR these together. Like if I wanted to use a single isSet call to check for these two things together, that obviously isn't going to be passable to a SymEntity flag taking argument, because as soon as you OR it together, it becomes an integer value. And so that's why I'm using that uint32 flag there, right? Anyway, so this is very simple. This is just saying we know we have the entity. We've got that flags field. So I'm just going to do a binary AND with whatever the value is, whichever one of those values you've passed in. And that's going to give me a value that would be 0 or 1, 0 or the flag value, right, after it was done. So then I'm going to return that value back, and that will be fine for anything that people need to if on, because as long as it's a 0, non-zero, that's all that's necessary in C. You don't have to have it be exactly 0 or 1. So that'd be the isSet call, and that's totally trivial. So I'll go ahead and stash that. In fact, do we have an entity.h file? I don't know if that maybe is more appropriate to put in here. We haven't really done much with entities yet, so it's hard to say. But let's go ahead and do that. So now let's see. Do we have entity.cpp? That should probably go, I guess, in here. Let's see here. There we go. And so we'll do this as well. This collisions, that's the same thing. This is test entity, and this is entity flag collides. So we got to see if both of the entities collide. Let's see, for stuff like this, when we add a wall, we will want to add in that flag. We could actually do an add flag here, something like that, where we set instead of doing the set manually, we go through a setting call. Again, don't really know if that's necessary, but I find this is more of a notational thing. This is not really necessarily a programming thing. I'm not anticipating us doing complicated things in here. This is not me like guessing about what's going to happen in the code later on and saying I think we want control over how these are set and read. I would be fine running the code by hand in there easily. It's not really a big deal. But the reason that I kind of want to have an add flag and isSet and that sort of thing for these guys is more for readability. I just kind of like having that readability. So if I want to say like add flag, it's just easier for me to see that that's what's going on, right? So if I do an add flag here, I could go ahead and do the exact same format for the call. You pass what flag you're trying to do, and then it just takes that entity flags and it ORs in the flag that you give it, right? And so our entity flag collides is there, and we're all good, right? So that's about it. Let's just finish, because we've got that same thing that we want to be able to do here, right? We want to be able to add that. Oops, that was wrong. Collides equals false, we don't have to do anything for, because we're assuming the flags start at 0. So we only have to turn them on. There we go. This one's going to be one that collides. So entity flag collides. So, and again, another one. That's our Monstar. Let's see, entity flag collides. So, and the familiar also collides. Entity.lowSym, entity flag collides. All right. So that should be about it. And now we just need to deal with the sword, again, which is non-spatial. So since the sword is non-spatial, we will say add flag entity lowSym flag, entity flag non-spatial. So now we know that the sword is a non-spatial entity that's not actually anywhere in the world at the moment. So given that that's the fact, that's the case, I suppose, you know what, we actually probably don't quite need to do that either now that I think about it, because technically, I think we know when things are spatial and non-spatial at the moment. The way that that's actually working is when we do a change entity location for things, we're actually, that whether or not that p-value happens to be valid, we kind of already know this, right? I don't know if you remember, but the way this was working is we have that null position for the p's and non. So what we could do pretty easily is in here just say that the way that this works is the low entities sim, when we change its position, the low entities sim will set it to non-spatial or spatial, right? So we basically have whether there's a new p or not. If there isn't a new position, we'll just, we'll add that non-spatial flag, and if there is a new position, we'll clear the flag. And so at that point, we kind of just have this easy way of making sure that that flag is always set based on that value, right? And that seems pretty straightforward to me. Now, we almost don't even need that because the low entity stores it already, but, and so I guess to some degree, we could even have this flag only be set at load time. But for now, I guess I'll leave it that way. When we go and do a little bit more with streaming entities in and out, we could do some more with that. All right, let's take a look at how this is going to work in our stream in and out. Let's take clear flag in here. And so clear flag is just going to do the exact same thing. Clear flag will basically and with not the flag, which means it passes all other flags through except that flag. Pretty straightforward again, it just gets rid of it. So if you want to remove a flag, you can do that. So that should be about it. Now, when we're actually in the sim region, we can go ahead and start handling these. Let's see what we got here. So obviously for move entity, I think we want to say, yeah, with move entity, we probably want to make sure that no one's trying to move an entity that has a non-spatial flag set, because that wouldn't make any sense. So probably what I would want to do here is assert, just for now, that whatever this entity is, it doesn't have the non-spatial flag set, because if it did, it wouldn't make very much sense. And similarly, we should probably assume that collides is authoritative here, but what we could also do is we could say that we want to make sure that both of these things are set, right? That we want these we want. So yeah, this is kind of interesting. What we could do here is say we want entity flag collides and non-spatial to not be set, right? So we want is set and not is set, if that makes sense, entity flag non-spatial, right? We could say that. And again, like, I don't really know, that's on both of these guys, right? I don't really know if that should be necessary. We could just assert that because maybe collides should never be set on something that's non-spatial, but I don't know. So it's just something to think about when we're testing entities. I'll leave it like that for now. There's also a question of whether we want to have our own sort of collapsing for that, because the test for something and not something else in flag language could be boiled down more simply, but we could also just assume that the compiler is smart enough to do that for us, or that we just don't care. We can think about that. But yeah. So let's see here. What else we got? We want to be able to, in our begin sim, check to see if we've got that situation going where things are non-spatial, right? So when we add entities in, obviously when we load something, when we do our is in rectangle check, we're going to have a situation where for any entity that we were looking at, if we have the low entity itself, we don't really need, if it's non-spatial, we don't really need to do a rectangle check on it because it can never be inside the rectangle if it's non-spatial, right? So if the entity flag non-spatial is set on this guy, then we don't need to check, right? So if we only want to do things that don't have non-spatial set. If non-spatial isn't set, then we would go ahead and pull him in this way. When we're in our add entity call, that's where it'll get pulled in, which is kind of a separate issue. But let's go ahead and do the nsim first as well. So when we're in the nsim, we have our stored entity reference, which we've written back. What we want to do now is when we do our map into chunk space, we don't want to do a map into chunk space for any entity that isn't going to be spatial, right? We want to just set him to the null position when we map him out if he's not spatial. So what we can do there is we can say, again, is if it's set, the entity that we're dealing with, we can say if that entity has the entity flag non-spatial, if it has that set, then instead of setting it to whatever the chunk space position of that entity is, we'll just set it to the null position, right? Like so. So that way on stream in, we don't check if it's not supposed to be spatial, and if we, and when we're streaming out, we write it back correctly based on that value, right? So that's one way to do it. Seems reasonable for now. I don't know. We'll take a look at it in more detail as we start to use it more. So the only thing that we need to do now is take a look at add entity, because add entity will still add entities by pulling them in if they're referenced by some other entity, right? So load entity reference will pull in new entities even if they're non-spatial. Like if the guy is holding a sword, it'll pull in the sword and that sort of stuff. So when we do that, and we do that add entity call, right? That add entity call does stuff like figuring out where things should live in the world. Excuse me. And so I just want to verify that we do something logical in that particular circumstance, right? So when we're doing add entity, when we add the entity and we pass it, so I believe there's multiple ways of doing that call. There's the add entity that takes a location, and there's an add entity call that does not take a location, right? And the get sim space p is something that happens when we don't pass that pointer there, right? And so I think, let's take a look here. I think load entity reference technically is doing it wrong at the moment. I think this is just a bug that we just never really encountered because we haven't done anything with the sim regions yet. But if you take a look at load entity reference, you can see that it's actually calling this version of add entity, which is one that does not actually take a position. And I think that that's wrong. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to like label that as a call that nobody should actually be doing. Oops, I hit my numlock key. Don't know why I did that. So I'm going to label that as add entity raw. And basically, I don't want anyone to call that call, I don't think. I think what we want them to do is we want them to call this always so that it actually, people get a position properly when they need it. And so we'll just have this guy call into that function where it'll pass a 0, right? What that's going to call that? Raw, there we go. And that way it'll always call this get sim space p, and then all we have to do is for get sim space p now, what we can do is say, well, all right, the v2 for the position of this entity, what we're going to do is we're going to initialize that to something, and then only in the case where we know that this entity is something that is legitimately supposed to be spatial. So basically, again, we just use that not is set, entity flag, non-spatial. So assuming that it's not a non-spatial entity, then we will go ahead and actually figure out where it is in the world. Otherwise, we will set its position to something totally random. Now, what we could do, again, is set this to some weird value, right? Like so that we know that it's not involved. We could also, in debug mode, set it to something weird, like a signaling nan value. I don't know if we want to do that, but we could put it to do here. Do we want to set this to signaling nan to make sure, nan in debug mode to make sure nobody ever uses the position of a non-spatial entity? And I don't know the answer to that question. There are values, there are floating point values you can set that will cause the FPU to cause a hard exception anytime you touch them. And that might be something we want to stick in here in developer mode, when we're not in release mode, so that if anyone ever tries to use a position value, that would break this for a non-spatial entity, it would tell us right away. That might be interesting. We could do something like that. All right. So anyway, we cannot convert the argument because I did not pass the pointer as I was supposed to. So that should handle that situation, right? Now, I don't know, again, where we're at. I just know that that was one of the things that we needed to do, so I went ahead and did it. But we have other things probably that we want to be able to do. So let's go ahead and start debugging this and see where we're at. So in update sword, this is interesting. So for update sword, we never handled this as well. And we've got this need to make, yeah, so we actually kind of knew that we hadn't finished this yet, I guess. It looks like I've even put an assertion in there. So let's go ahead and finish porting the update sword routine to correctly be non-spatial. And that should be pretty easy to do now that we actually have it, because before we didn't have it. So when we update sword, I think there's probably nothing really that we need to do if it's in its non-spatial state. So basically, if that non-spatial, maybe there will be in the future, but for now, if that entity flag non-spatial is set, we don't actually need to do anything. So all we need to do is when it is actually set, and once it travels the total distance that the sword traveled, I don't know why we don't have a to-do here, but we should need to handle the fact that distance traveled might not have enough distance for the total entity move for the frame. We'll deal with that a little bit later on. So anyway, yeah, inside our update sword call, assuming that the entity actually is spatial, then we'll do the thing where we move the sword. And when it gets to the end, what we want to do here is now make the entity not exist anymore. So we can just have a make entity non-spatial or something like this, some kind of call where we just say make entity non-spatial, and we pass that entity, and that will sort of delete it from the spatialness of the world, right? And that'd be, I don't know why these are all inline at the moment. I guess probably because we're doing them inside a switch kind of a situation, so maybe that does make some sense. But basically, make entity non-spatial is a really trivial routine. All that's going to do is set that flag. I don't think we really need to do anything else at the moment. We could update the SimSpace P to be the valid location. In fact, I could do something where we have a pound defined for this. You know what I'm saying? Like something where essentially in this entity.h, we say pound define invalid P or something like that, and we just can make that be whatever the value is that we're going to do. So we have our invalid P here, and we can set our invalid P here as well. So we do make entity non-spatial, we'll set its P equal to that, and it will set the flag on the entity that's, excuse me, that says that it's non-spatial. So entity flag non-spatial comes in, there we go, and that's about it. That's all that should really have to do. And then we similarly have the inverse thing, which would be make entity spatial, right? And to make the entity spatial on a sim entity, what you would need to do is pass in the position that's where you actually want it to be. And what that would do is exactly the opposite, right? It would clear that non-spatial flag, and then it would set the entity's position to the position that you asked for, right? And similarly, I guess we could say that it would set the velocity of the entity probably to 0 to clear that out as well. Or maybe you pass one in. We could say that you pass in whatever its starting velocity should be, something like that. Either way, seems pretty straightforward. So let's just go ahead and assume that we've got those guys and that they're hanging out. All right, we can deal with that later. So that's what we want to do there. Let's see where we're at again. Just trying to figure out exactly what's going on with all of our stuff. So in our nsim, let's see here. In our nsim, what entity are we dealing with? We're dealing with the sword here. Let's go ahead and see why we're getting this assertion, because our sword shouldn't have had its location changed like that, or it should have had location changed, but it shouldn't be having an assertion problem, I don't think. So I don't actually know what this is complaining about. Flags equals this. Oh, I do sort of see, I guess, what it's complaining about here. Where is our stored value? P. Well, the stored, that's actually fine. The stored value, it's coming from an invalid chunk. It looks like, is that correct? Let's see. Stored P, it's coming from an invalid chunk and it's staying in an invalid chunk. So what was the assertion? What was the problem there that it was complaining about? Assert not old P or is valid. So it was expecting us to pass null in both cases where the things were not going to be valid. So that's kind of interesting. I wonder if that's just a bad idea for how, because it makes this call kind of harder to use, if that makes sense. What we'd rather be able to do is pass the null position in here and have that actually be the way that that works. So I wonder if this is actually kind of just annoying and not really what we would want for the way that this call works, because basically it would make us do a bunch of busy work here. Like I'd have to go ahead and make sure I check to see exactly whether it was spatial and now it's not, and vice versa and stuff, and then pass nulls or not in each of these conditions. For the new P, that's not such a big deal, but again, for the old P, it would be. I'd have to go actually start looking at that, which isn't so good. And so I wonder if maybe we just want that code to kind of be a little more intelligent about how it works, and maybe change up sort of how we're thinking about these old P's, old P's and new P's, if that makes sense. Furthermore, passing in the old P doesn't really make any sense anymore because the low entity itself actually has this information in it. So this is all kind of a little janky and kind of more about the old way we were doing things, and doesn't really necessarily reflect what we actually do now, if that makes sense. So I wonder if this is just kind of stupid and we shouldn't just take the opportunity to modernize this a little bit based on the fact that we now know that it can always work directly on correct values. That seems like a good idea, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. So I'm going to go ahead and say, let's get rid of this call entirely, this one right here, basically, and let's fold this up into here in some kind of nice way. So instead, we could just say, we have a low entity index, and we have whatever, maybe when you say change entity location, you always also have to pass the entity, not just the index, because it is going to update, it's going to update that call. So what we could do, Sorry, I'm just thinking this through. I'm thinking through what the best way to do this is. So, all right, I'll start with this. Let's put it this way. I'll start with this. So what we'll do at first is we'll say, okay, we have the low entity. We're going to take a world position, and the world position for now, the new position will always be an actual position, and you'll just pass null position if you don't want it to set to a new position, right? Does that make sense? Because we have the null position, right? And so we can just do an is valid on something, and we don't need to pass pointers for that, right? So we can say is valid new P, and then we get this, right? So what I could do is make this work essentially that way, right? So we've got new P init like that. I guess I could actually do it this way. And then we'll just have this guy do old P, world position, new P, like so. These will both start out being nulls, which is what this routine wanted in the first place. And then what we'll do is we'll say if new P init is valid, right? If the new position that's pointing in that we're getting is valid, then we'll actually set new P equal to point to it. Otherwise, it will remain null. And for old P, what we'll do is we'll say if low entity, if that flag is not set. Oops, that's a sim there. Entity flag non-spatial. In the case where the low entity is not supposed to be spatial, it will leave it set to 0. But in the case where it is a spatial entity, then it will go ahead and grab that position out of the low entity and use it. So that would keep it working basically the same way it is now, but it will, make it so that that we can call it in a more sensible fashion, right? And so now when you change it into location, you don't ever have to pass that. You just pass whatever the new P is going to be, and let's take a look here. So when we add low entities in, the same thing would be true. Instead, now when we pass that P value here, let's just go ahead and pass real P values through for now. Let's take a look. We'll just pass null position in the cases here. And again, I think we probably want to clean this up one step further, but for now, this will be okay. Let's keep going here, and so on. All right. So let's see how that gets us. Let's just take a look. All right. Oh, this is interesting. What is going on here? Get world chunk. What is our problem? Chunk. Whoa, that's weird. That is just bizarre. Get world chunk. Chunk is returning kind of garbagey values there. What has happened? Add low entity. Let's see here. So we're in this call. Is this the first time? Where are we on this? Okay, so it's our first one. So let's go ahead and step in there. That's good. So we do our add low entity. Our add low entity is going to initialize that to essentially the invalid value. Then we go in to add it. It's going to do the add, and then it's going to try and call that change location. Well, that's true. So we actually have to also check to make sure that that is a valid value, and that the spatial. Yeah. So again, this is a little janky. It's just a little not quite right, because you have two things that both represent the same value. You have the fact that it's non-spatial, which is a flag, and then you also have the fact that this p value can be set to an invalid value. It's a little janky, right? You see why I think that's a little janky. I don't know, maybe you don't see why I think that's a little janky. But essentially what we would have to do here for the catch-all is say, also the p value has to be valid, right? Both of those things have to be true in order for this to be set, right? And that would go this way. And I just don't love that. Like, I just don't love that concept. Oops, I did that wrong. Because, like, it just seems like I didn't do it wrong. I just have to go set that in here. It just seems like I don't really like that idea. I never like having state stored in two places, right? It just invites errors where people set it in one and not the other. And so I'd like to think it through how I might get rid of that. It might be sometimes you can't avoid it, and so, you know, if it has to be that way, it has to be that way. But it just makes me unhappy is all. But yeah, so all we have to do really is initialize the p to null position, and that solves the problem that we were having there. But it's just not fantastic. So yeah. Anyway, I don't know what exactly is going on with that guy. Let's see here. So I think that solved most of our problems. We just have a few weird things going on now. We start out centered wrong. And so I have a to-do in there to look at why, now that we're switched to simulation reasons, we're centered wrong. And then the other thing that we have to do is, what was I going to say? We need to update our camera code so that it follows the guy again. But again, we'll leave that low entity spatial thing for now. Maybe I'll put in a little note just as something to think about so that we don't forget about it. And when we're looking through things in future cleanup passes, if we have a good idea where we're like, this is how we could fix this, right? We'll fix it. So to do, it's kind of busted that p's can be invalid here. And we store whether they would be invalid in the flags field. Can we do something better here? And so, you know, now might not be the best time to tackle that. It might be better to tackle that a little later on when we understand the structure that active and inactive, like simulated and non-simulated and stored entities are going to look, like how they're going to look and that sort of stuff. But it's just something that's on my mind and I don't love. So that's that. All right, so what I want to do now is go ahead and start cleaning up the rest of this stuff. Let's find out why the camera's not tracking the guy. That would be a good idea. So when we add a player, we're setting the camera following index equal to that player. So I think that should still be working, but we're not currently tracking the movement. So let's find out why. I thought we copied that code in here. In fact, we did. It's right here. So we should try to figure out, why isn't that working, right? So the entity itself, we want to figure out why this is never getting triggered, or if it is getting triggered, why it's not taking any effect. It looks like the reason is because the camera P never gets written back. Like we update new camera P here because we used to have a change call here, and now we don't anymore. So it may be as simple as just saying whatever the new camera P is, we could just flat out set it to the camera P and have that work. So I guess that's one way to do it. Let's go ahead and take a look. Now, I guess that would be it. That would be all we'd have to do. Not sure if that'll work or not, but let's take a look. Why is my guy floating off into space? I think his DZ never gets updated anymore as well, so we got to go take a look at that. Once he starts jumping, he never stops. All right, so that fixed the camera problem too. Let's take a look at why our DZ is busted. That's, I guess, probably something that's still... We never really did anything with Z, like I said before, but we might as well keep it working. So let's see here. So we have the DZ value. It should be getting updated in entities. It looks like, right? It's coming in through here. And the DZ value should be getting set. I'm not sure why it isn't. That's kind of odd. I wonder what the problem is with that. So if controller start ended down, con hero DZ equals 3. Looks like, what is con hero? Con hero, it looks like we never clear it is the problem. So we never clear the con hero D request at all. And that's obviously going to cause the problem. Remember, we're storing the controller input now in anticipation for doing some stuff later. So that is pretty straightforward. That obviously makes perfect sense. Yeah. It's still, that's a little weird. Why is it moving down in that? Yeah, so we still have some weird bugs going on here. All right, so assuming that the DZ is set to 0 now, I don't remember exactly how we did this control hero thing. So we have our DZ, we have our DSORD, we have our DDP. Seems like all of those things probably want to be set to 0. Well, the DSORD doesn't actually do anything. Well, no, it does. That's true. So we want to kind of zero this out, I think, entirely for now. We can think about how we want to do that exactly a little bit more in the future. But we want to zero those things out. And then when we come down here and we set those, yeah, so the entity DZ, we only want to update that DZ if the con hero DZ was actually set to something, right? Yeah, so we do want to actually say as long as that is not a 0 value, then they're actually trying to jump. This is kind of janky. Again, we don't really care about this very much, but that restores our jump control anyway, so that's fine because I don't know, we had that jump in there. We might as well keep it for now. So the last thing I want to do is figure out why our camera is. What's going on with our camera focus in general? Like what's the deal with the camera location? Why are we staring not at the center of the room? And so I'm going to take a look at what's going on there because I think we've got either a bug or just a misunderstanding in how our code is working, and so I want to take care of that. So we have done this to do add logic to the sim region to handle unplaced entities. We have not done this to do yet, which is what we need to do now, which is figure out why the camera's a little wonky. So let's take a look at that. We know that at startup, we do set the camera, right? Or at least we were. Here is how we set the camera, right? We said new camera P equals this camera tile X, camera tile Y situation, right? There's our new camera P. And then we were adding monstars and familiars near there and whatever. We did all that stuff, right? So is it just because we never call set camera? It is just because we never call set camera. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. We had those change camera calls. We deleted them. I never put them back in. So basically, we would want to do that, right? That seems pretty obvious. That may be it, and that was it. So that's the entirety of our problem, it looks like. Yeah. All right. Well, that's good. So now we should restore our sword functionality probably as well. Again, we started about 15 minutes late today, so to get an hour's worth of programming in, I'm going to go another 15 minutes certainly. and then we'll still do Q&A. So don't worry about that, but I don't want to do less programming than we were going to do. Looks like our sim region seems to be working pretty well. No particular problems. Yeah, everything seems to be restored. And so now we just should probably do our quote-unquote sword. Again, we don't have the sword graphic in yet, so it's just a stupid little rock. But gotta start somewhere. People probably fought with rocks back in the day. The other thing we should probably do sometime soon is get this sorting stuff in there, because sorting wouldn't be too hard for us to do, and that way we'd actually pass in front of these entities instead of behind them. Right now, things are getting drawn in whatever order they were added to the sim, right? And so that's not particularly useful. We want to be able to sort them so that things, I should occlude those trees, not the other way around. Anyway, yeah, I think we just need to take a look at what's going on with our sword because we never actually ported that code. So let's take a look at that. When we do our sword code, where is that? That's going to be in our hero control code, right? That's going to be basically down here where we do our entity type hero. When we take a look at that D sword, what we really need to do here is just, I guess, figure out what's going on with this guy. I guess our sword, the problem is we have to make the sword spatial at this point, right? So what we want to do is say, okay, if we had a sword, what we need to do is make entity spatial, right? And we want to pass this stuff in here. We want to pass the entity P as the position for him, and this is going to be the DP. So we already did the work that we need to do here to make that happen. So I think that's it. Just telling it to make it spatial so that it participates in the sim properly. Yeah, and that looks fine. That looks like what it should look like. Although I am a little bit weirded out by why the shadow is so... Oh, the shadow's probably so dark because it's probably just a full dark... Well, I don't know. I'm a little... Doesn't that shadow look super dark to you? Why is the... It looks like it's drawing the shadow many times, or maybe there's already a shadow on the stone. I don't know, but it looks wrong to me. That looks wrong. So I'm going to go ahead and set a loop point here, right? I'm going to go ahead and just set a loop point so I can fire that and just leave it kind of firing there. And then I'm going to go in here and take a look at what's going on. So here's my sword, right? And I'm going to go ahead and comment out the shadow bitmap entirely. So I think that sword really feels like it's getting drawn multiple times to me. That really does, right? That's what it feels like to me. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to see, are we somehow getting multiple calls? Is there somehow more than one sword, like getting drawn or getting added in here? I don't know. Because that would be pretty easy to do. And we might want to add some checking to make sure that since we're creating things in the sim region and then writing them back out, I wonder if we should add some code there to make sure that stuff doesn't get loaded in and written out twice, especially in the early times when we're getting the sim region working and might have bugs, right? So, all right, let's take a look here. What have we got? When we do our update sword and then we do the push bitmap, what would be an easy way to do this? Let's say that we took the entity index here, like so, whatever the entity index was of this guy. Let me just go ahead and add that in to the location, the offset in pixels of that. So I'm going to do 10 times the entity index, like so, and I'm just going to run that, right? Oh, I guess that was too much. Never mind. So now you'll notice that I'm only seeing one of them. All right, so let's go ahead and add a fractional value in there. There you go. So we've got lots of entity indexes that are all the sword, apparently. And so that's no good. It doesn't make any sense. So we've clearly done something wrong. Probably, again, we have a bug with how our sim region, how our entities system brings in elements. We're probably not... I made that hash table specifically to prevent things from being loaded multiple times through the referencing system. I probably have a bug there, is what I would guess, although I don't really know. So point being, we now kind of want to go and check to see what's going on there. I think that's priority number one. So let's take a look. We now know that my suspicion was correct about the fact that these things are broken, and so we should be able to figure out why. So let's go into our handmade sim region and see. We know that we're having some kind of problem with multiple entities. We know we only ever created one sort anyway, at least we thought we did. And so I want to first do a very simple thing, which is try to add some stuff into the sim region code to guard against having multiple entities in the sim region that all map to the same storage index, right? And so one thing that I could do here is, for example, when we do an nsim, I could do something where I try to guard against that rewriting by doing a check on up and back loading, basically. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in here to, we already added these flags, right, in our handmade entity, right? What I'm going to do is I'm going to have a flag here which is like simming or something like this, right? And I'm going to make that be a flag that's kind of at the end here. It's like a debug flag, essentially. What I'm going to do is I'm going to say that when we load something out, right? When we do our begin sim and we pull something in, so when we do add entity, right? When we do an add entity call, at the time that something gets added in, right? I am going to, oh, you know what? And we don't really, yeah. Well, at the time when something gets added in, I'm going to say at that point, we mark it as having been, we mark its source entity as having been loaded in, right? So we'll say that we'll basically do an add flag, right? Simming to the source version of that entity, right? So the source sim version gets that flag added. And I also want to assert before I add it that it was not flat set, right? Like so. So basically we'll assert here that it was not set so that we can see if we loaded something twice. And then when we write things, when we go through and write things out again, we will go ahead and clear that flag on the right. So when we go into nsim, we'll do the same thing. Right here, when we store it out, we'll basically do an assert that the place that we're storing it out to had that simming flag set. So we'll say, okay, let's assert that the stored entity had that simming flag set, and then we will clear it. Although I guess at this point, actually this call will clear it itself. So we'll go ahead and assert that it's not set after that. Okay, so those are just, again, purely, purely debug code. It's just there to guard against bugs on our part and catch them earlier so that we don't have to, sort of notice them like we did with the sword. So let's see, too many actual parameters for assert. Oops, that's just put the parentheses in the wrong place there. Let's see, what is it? Oh, this is supposed to be an address of. So let's see. Conversion from sim entity flags to uint32, signed, unsigned, mismatch. Oh, please. Are you telling me that this is always thinking itself is signed versus unsigned? That's really annoying. All right, does that help? Anything? Does this help? Basically, this is complaining because it's saying that conversion from entity flags to uint32 signed. It's saying that sim entity flags is signed. But I don't want it to be signed, I want it to be unsigned, and I'm not sure how to make it understand that, which is unfortunate. We can get around it by doing this, but that's really annoying. We'll think about that later. All right, let's see here. Too many actual parameters for macro assert. Same thing, I just cut and paste bugged that. Let's go ahead and do that there. Cannot find conversion, that's address of. And there we go. So now let's see if that catches our bug. I was kind of hoping that it would, and it does. So that's good. So when I went ahead and pushed the sword button, we got that assert of that simming flag, basically. So let's see what's going on here. During begin sim, it's pulling something in. So it looks like what's happening, if I had to guess, is our sword is getting pulled in both by the spatial query and by the reference. And so what I'd like to do is figure out why that's happening. Oh, you know what? I do know why that's happening. That's actually totally what would happen. Right now, we're not checking to make sure that we don't already have the entity when we do an add entity raw, which technically could happen because basically all we did is prevent references from bringing in entities that were already brought in by references. But we haven't prevented spatial queries from bringing in entities that were already referenced by references, if that makes sense. So what we want to do is make it so that everybody checks to make sure that something hasn't already been brought in through the hash table before it does that, right? So what we would like to do is much like in load entity reference where we check the hash entry first before adding the entry. What we want to do here is do that same check before we do this guy, right? So what we want to do here is say, let's make sure that whatever that storage index is, let's make sure that that doesn't actually exist yet before we go ahead and do this, like so, right? And the other thing we can do is now map storage index to entity, map storage index to entity. I think now should collapse into the add entity raw routine, right? Basically, this should now be done right here because we already have that hash entry. We already know that it's there, and so we can just go ahead and use it. We don't have to look for it again, right? And so that's fine. So that looks totally fine to me. Let's go ahead and try that. Get rid of that, right? And I think that should do it. There we go. And that looks much better. Now we're only getting one, which is what we wanted, and we're not hitting that assert at all, and so on. All right, so let's just clean that up a bit. Obviously, we want to get rid of that drawing change I made there. We don't want to be offsetting this by its entity index anymore. So let's go ahead and fix that. And similarly, we also want to add code to make sure that the, like, I don't know if you noticed, but if I hold down the key, it keeps resetting the sword. We want to make it so that if you hit the key, if the sword's already there, it doesn't relaunch the sword. Again, pretty easy to do now that we know whether the sword is active or not. Basically, all we'd have to do is take a look and say, all right, when we get it, if sword and is set non-spatial, then we know that the sword is not in existence right now and can be shot, and so that's fine. And so now I can't do that anymore. I have to wait till it's done to fire again. So that's good. I think now we've fixed the to-dos that we had there, and we are back into good position with the sim regions. We've got a bunch of stuff we can do now too. The sim regions are working well and they allow us to do references and pull things through references. So I think everything's in pretty good shape. We have one more thing to do, which is the apron stuff, which I guess we can do tomorrow, which is this right here. So I guess that'll be what we'll focus on tomorrow, and that may be it for upgrading our stuff. Again, I can't think of anything else that we really had to do in there, so that's pretty good. So with that in mind, maybe it's time to go to the Q&A. If you could, go ahead and prefix your questions with Q:, and keep them to things that we've done on today's stream or on previous streams. If you want to ask off-topic questions, that's totally cool, but not for right now. Ask those during the pre-stream. Come about 15 minutes before the stream is scheduled to start, and we handle off-topic questions then. So that's totally cool, but let's just do it. Make sure we do it then. No questions? This is going to be a quick Q&A. Probably it's too early in the morning. Nobody has questions because they're sleepy, which I don't blame them because I'm sleepy too. Does the current collision code support walls that are not 90 degrees? Say if the wall was at 45 degrees, would the collision code still work? The general part of the collision code would work, but I'm pretty sure we don't have a wall routine in there at the moment for anything that's 45 degrees, because we kind of just put in placeholder collision detection, right? We haven't really done the full collision detection stuff yet. So if I remember correctly, let's take a look. Oops, move entity. Yeah, so the test wall, right? This is the call, and basically what needs to happen is you need to compute the intersection time of a ray and the wall. And right now we only wrote a routine for doing that for horizontal or vertical walls. So if you wanted to do walls at 45-degree angles or any other angle, you would just have to write this part of the code you'd have to write one of these that did that. It's very simple math to do so, but we didn't do that yet. And we don't necessarily know if we will ever do that, because what we might do is use a slightly different way of computing collision in the final collision detector that doesn't quite do it this way. So whether we will do that or not, I don't know. But again, it's not too hard to figure out how to do it. It's the same exact math that we were doing before. It's basically, it's basically just trying to figure out the intersection time where you've got two rays that are going at each other, and you could look up online how to do that pretty easily if you wanted to. Just the intersection of two line segments, basically, or ray versus line segment, is all that needs to go in there. But the rest of this code is fine. I mean, there is one thing too that we want to do. Like, this code is fragile at the moment. The reason being because when it's good. This code is good in the sense that it tests to see if you're going to hit things, and it doesn't allow you to tunnel through them. But once you actually finish the step, it doesn't handle the numerical precision properly in a safe way. So if the step happens to numerically put you right on that edge, you could end up inside something on the next frame because of the way the numerical stuff works out. So we do have more work to do to make a really good collision detector. This is not one that I would ship for that reason. But in general, the logic here of testing doesn't care whether the walls are 45 degrees or anything else. It's just this one part that cares. And this is the only thing that cares, even that it's a line. Basically, as long as you can produce the time that tmin, you could test against anything here, circles or whatever, right? This code doesn't care what you're testing against, really. Why not set a Boolean value to be removed? I assume you mean the sword? It seems like setting the position to some arbitrary position isn't as explicit as setting a flag to say that the entity should be removed on the next update frame. But we do set a flag, right? It's non-spatial, is the flag. I'm not sure what you mean. We're not removing the entity. The entity is still there. We're just setting it to not be in a spatial location, right? And so that is what we're doing essentially, is setting a bool, right? We're setting it to be non-spatial when it gets removed, right? So when we call make entity non-spatial, which is in entity.cpp, when we call make entity non-spatial, that's what we're doing. The reason that I was setting its p to an invalid p is just for further debugging. Like, I want to make sure that people aren't still using that p, and so I want to be able to, when we look at things, I want to be able to see that it's in an invalid p, so that it doesn't, we don't accidentally get people who are processing it after it becomes non-spatial, basically. But the entity's not getting deleted. It's still there. Hi, Casey. The rearranging of code did some errors in the code. I think it probably means like there were errors introduced in the rearranging of code. Is this normal for daily coding? Yes. Any complicated system, when you rearrange stuff, you're going to make some mistakes, and that's fine. That's totally fine. I would feel comfortable when I would run in such errors. I would feel uncomfortable when I would run in such errors, but you seem to get the logic even better after such encounters. Yeah, I mean, I feel like that is a skill that you have to kind of develop. Again, hopefully I'm kind of showing you some techniques as we go that can help you with there. Like, you notice when I saw that the shadow was busted on the entity, I was like, oh yeah, one thing we should probably do is put in some checking here to guard against multiple, like the same entity getting pulled in multiple ways. That is a better thing to do, in my opinion, right, than just debugging that one problem, because, like you said, whenever you're rearranging code and whenever you're trying to move things around, you're gonna, like, it's so complicated. Any good game, high performance and flexibility and kind of interesting game mechanics, all those sorts of things, there's gonna be a ton of complexity there, and you wanna try and develop programming methods that allow you to catch those things so that you don't have to be afraid of reorganizing your code, right? And like a lot of people ask about unit testing, and unfortunately unit testing isn't really that useful in games because it's too hard to write unit tests that cover all the things that could happen. But that doesn't mean that you can't put in lots of debug checking just the same. So constantly look for places you can do not necessarily unit testing, but ways in which you can put in assertions and debug checks that will validate your assumptions when you can is still good, right? You want to do that because it'll help you debug. And so that's something I did, and that's an example. Those assertions on the simming flag, that's an example of something that's designed to catch those kind of problems that can be introduced in reorganization, or that I think are going to be common. And so that's just like, yes, it's tough, but learning how to write code that tends to fail in ways that you can notice is very important, right? And so I do try to write code that's going to be clear and fail in ways that we will notice. And when I think that there's going to be subtle failures, I try to add those assertions. And so that's exactly what I did today with catching that sword problem. I was like, this is going to be a subtle kind of bug, so let me try and add something to the system that's artificial that will make the bug be loud and non-subtle. And so bringing those to the surface in that way is a good way of trying to get around the problem you're talking about, which is being uncomfortable about making those changes because of the errors they can introduce, right? Do we expect most entities to be colliding? If so, does it make sense to have the flag be non-colliding instead? Yeah, I would say that isn't a bad suggestion. I'll put in a to-do for that. I don't know. I haven't really thought about exactly all the entity types we're going to have. So I don't know. But I could certainly say to do, does it make more sense to have the flag be for non-colliding entities? And I don't know. That's a good question. Then why set null position for sandstone? Where are we talking about setting null position? Are you talking about setting null position in the sim region here? Sorry, I'm still very sick. Would using a tagged union for entity references fix issues we're having with load entity reference? What issues are you talking about? I'm not sure. I'm not sure what issues you're actually referring to. If you want to be more specific, I could elaborate. Do you have the whole big picture game architecture in your head at every point, or do you have to check what you did from time to time? Usually I have the entire big picture in my head, but I don't know if that'll be true on Handmade Hero because, like, I only do it an hour a day, and I'm program, full time during the day as well. So my mind is mostly occupied by stuff that I do for the main programming I'm doing during the day. And so I don't know if I'll be able to keep all of Handmade Hero in my head as a result, but normally I would. So on Handmade Hero, I think I may have to check from time to time because I feel like I won't probably have that same kind of situational awareness I'll have when I'm programming things every day full time. Because I know that I certainly, like after I leave a project for a while, when I come back to it, like if it's been a couple months and I come back to a project, I don't remember how everything worked and I have to look, right? And so I think that might happen to me here because it's not my main focus. It's only an hour a day. No more questions? Looks like no more questions. I see no more questions. All right, well, doesn't look like we've got any more questions. So I think that means it is time to wrap things up, which is totally fine. That actually means we're on time, even though we started the stream 15 minutes late. All right, well, thank you everyone for joining me for another episode of Handmade Hero. It has been a pleasure coding with you, as always. If you would like to follow along at home with the source code, you can always go to handmadehero.org and pre-order the game. It comes with the source code, which you can download every night. I upload it after I finish coding every day on the stream. So if you'd like to do that, you can do that here. You can also support the video series by subscribing to our Patreon, which you can do here, which is very much appreciated. And if you would like to be notified of the schedule, we do have a tweet bot that sits there and tweets the schedule to you, so you can always know when we are streaming. We also have a news and forum site if you'd like to discuss things, ask questions, check out our episode guide, or look at community ports to Linux and Mac, that sort of thing. There's a lot of great stuff on there, so I highly recommend checking that out if you're interested in the series. It's a good resource to go to. So that's about it. I will be here tomorrow at our regular time, 8 p.m. Pacific Standard Time tomorrow. So I hope to see you all there. When we will wrap up the sim region stuff, I think I guess there's really nothing else on the to-do list there except that apron thing, which I wanted to think about a little bit. So I guess we'll just kind of go through and think about that apron thing a bit. And then we'll decide tomorrow night what it is we're going to do next. We'll just kind of see. I guess probably what we'll do is finish our sort of combat sort of stuff where we can have the sword hit the Monstar could fight back, those sorts of things. I guess that's probably the next logical thing to do, so we'll probably do that. But we will see tomorrow night. Hope to see you there. And yeah, have a good rest of your day and rest of tomorrow, and hope to see you tomorrow night. So thanks for joining me, and take it easy, everyone.